Therapy is not designed for men. I will explain why using what we know according to science. My sources will be linked in the description. Firstly, let's go into what I mean by therapy is not designed for men. Did I say that all men should or should not go into therapy? Did I say therapy does or does not work for all men? No. Yet I stand by my claim that therapy is not designed for men. In this video, I'm going to explain the inherent disconnect between men and women when it comes to therapy, explain how therapy's fundamental design is not suited for men, why it doesn't work for a lot of men, and what a better alternative is. So for those who have had positive experiences with therapy, and they spread this message that others should go to therapy, I believe your intentions are pretty good, but you're missing part of the picture here. So let me give you some perspective on this. Imagine if a man came up to you and he said,
"You're going to therapy? That never worked for me. Instead, what you should do is just go to a quiet place where you are alone. Then, take all that pent-up rage and stuff it down like a turkey on Thanksgiving. Next, get those muscles working with some good old push-ups. Trust me, it's like hitting the reset button for your soul."
That right there is exactly what it feels like for many men who are constantly told, you should go to therapy. Many of us have just different ways of coping and dealing with stress, depression, and negative emotions, and they work differently for us. And just because it works well for you, doesn't mean it's going to work the same for other people. Many men find therapy to be very ineffective. But going back, how can I even say that therapy isn't designed for men? What does that even mean? Well, believe it or not, my source of information is not just like rehashing of some red pill manosphere content or whatever Andrew Tate says. My reasoning comes from what the studies show on how men and women cope and deal with depression, stress, negative emotions differently from one another. Not only that, but the symptoms of depression are displayed differently between the sexes. This is why there are these common myths that people actually still believe to this day, where some people believe that women are several times more likely to be depressed than men, which is just absolutely untrue. We're supposed to believe that women are much more depressed than men, despite the fact that men kill themselves far more frequently? To me, that just makes no sense. The issue was the studies failed to measure the symptoms correctly. Men and women displayed different symptoms for depression and things like stress, which led to incorrect results. It's as if you're asking men in a different language altogether, are you stressed? Are you depressed? Are you whatever? They can't give you a reliable or accurate answer because you both don't speak the same language. For example, women with depression are more likely to express their emotions outwardly, displaying signs of sadness, crying, or verbalizing their feelings. Men, however, are more prone to internalizing their emotions, are more irritable, angry, and more prone to risk-taking. This isn't even on the level of people speaking different languages. Men are physically incapable of talking about these things at all. Now, not all men and women are like this. Some women are more masculine, and some men are simply more feminine, which is why I never said that all men can't get something out of therapy or shouldn't go to therapy, because not all men are the same or masculine. Yet, it's a true generalization. According to what we know, this is how the masculine and the feminine deal with depression. Now that we understand that, let's look at therapy on a fundamental level. What is therapy? Therapy is where somebody listens to you, hears you out, and then offers a solution to your problems. Now let me ask you, what happens when you try to do this to a man, especially very masculine men? The more masculine men, they generally tend to avoid these things. And because of that, people get the idea that this is toxic masculinity. It forces you to suppress your emotions. They are insecure and they're hiding it. They're pretending to be masculine. Men need to stop suppressing their emotions and release them like women do. Excuse me. What do you think a very masculine man would do if he just released his emotions? A man's form of releasing his emotions would be to smack you. Men release emotions through action. You don't want him to release his emotions. That's just stupid. A lot of people don't take into account how men and women experience different emotions at different levels when they're stressed or depressed. If it's one thing, it's not toxic masculinity that's stopping him from releasing his emotions. It's the police and law enforcement. Then people wonder why when a man is depressed or stressed that he goes off to a quiet place in his room and he just bottles up his emotions. Now look, I'm all for releasing emotions. It's not healthy to bottle them up, but you just can't expect a man to release them the same way women do in therapy. I mean, for crying out loud here, women tend to use both hemispheres of the brain when speaking and processing verbal information, whereas men tend to use just one side. So men are physically incapable of verbalizing their emotions on the same level as women can. So do you honestly believe that his form of releasing his emotions would simply be talking or going to therapy? Now I know you mean good, but what you should instead tell him is to go release his emotions on a punching bag and just keep your kids away from him while he does it. That's what you should do. Now, there's going to be a lot of pushback from the things I've said, so I want to take a moment to address two important things. There are going to be people who adhere to a more blank slate mentality belief system. And they might say the reason why men and women release their emotions differently is because men at a young age, they're not allowed to express their emotions like women are. If men complained or cried, they would be punished for doing the exact same things women are allowed to do. And this might affect them on a neurological level. Remember, it's said that men tend to use only one side, while women tend to use both. And this might affect men and women on a neurological level. I mean, when you're young, your brains are incredibly malleable. And this could explain why men can't even verbalize their emotions on the same level that women can. So other neurological differences you might find in the brain might not be inherent proof that these gender differences are inherently biological, but rather social. Which is honestly a very interesting theory, but there is just one problem. What about transsexuals then? Why won't you say the exact same thing about transsexuals? We're told that these transsexual women are born with much more feminine brains. This causes them to act more feminine and more like women, and therefore they are women. Yet they abandon this exact same line of logic when men act masculine and women act feminine. It's all social constructs, they say, when it's men acting like men and women acting like women. But when it's a transsexual, now it's genetic. Now it's biological. This is a logical inconsistency. You can't say it's biological in one instance and social in the next. I've looked into the neurological differences between heterosexuals, transsexuals, homosexuals, feminine men, and masculine women, and I can say that there is no stronger defense out there to the idea that gender, yes, gender, is biological than the scientific findings behind why transsexuals are the way they are. Absolutely nobody on that side of the fence is going to say that transsexuals arise due to their environment. The reality is, though, you need to pick a side. Are transsexuals born that way and gender is biologically determined? Or is gender a social construct and we are responsible for why transsexuals even exist? You cannot eat your cake and have it too. With that alone, I just at least hope I've given you something to think about. Look into these things yourself. And the second point that people might bring up is that dealing with your emotions in a strict masculine way is unhealthy compared to how women handle it. This is why women themselves less than men do. This is wrong. Do you want to know why? Because women attempt suicide far more than men do. Women just don't succeed as much. Because popping pills and cutting is far less successful than grabbing the old shotty and aiming it a good 90 degrees upward, or jumping off a high place, or driving into a tree 180 miles per hour. If women attempted the same way men did, we would see way higher rates in women than in men. We wouldn't even need to mention the fact that in the 1950s, when gender roles were their most strict, where men weren't allowed to show their emotions or cry in public or talk about them, suicide was at its lowest. If it was connected to being masculine, then we would see a reduction in suicide, not an increase. Which leads me to believe it has to do with other societal problems, such as economic problems and drug abuse. Not being able to own your own home, for crying out loud. Before we cover the last part of the video where we talk about healthy alternatives to therapy if they don't work for you, be sure to subscribe if you made it this far. If you enjoyed this video, you sure will enjoy what else is on this channel. What is a good healthy alternative to therapy if it just doesn't work for you, man or woman? Well, the answer is actually physical activities and working out. There actually have been studies that show that exercise is literally 1.5 times more effective than therapy or medication, at least in terms of dealing with things like depression. So the bro advice of just, well, work out is actually scientifically supported. But once again, I'm not telling you to work out or to do therapy or do anything. Do what is best for you. You know yourself better than me. I'm not your daddy or your mommy, but I at least hope I explained on behalf of all of the men and women who don't find therapy to be effective and just don't understand why. Well, hopefully I articulated it for them and for you to also understand. So please, be more sympathetic towards them and don't be pushy with these things like therapy onto them. That does nobody any good. Just because it worked works well for you doesn't mean it's gonna work well for other people. I hope you understand that. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you agree or disagree, let me know your thoughts down below. This is a very interesting special video. It is something I actually articulated very recently, so let me know your thoughts. Anyways, take care.